This is Avengers number 218, and I will say this for the comic: this cover does not let you down. We have the Avengers, Iron Man, Thor, Captain America, and Wasps. They are watching a child about to shoot himself, and the issue fulfills that promise in spades. This one is written by DeMatteis again, and it even has the same artist as Defenders. But what stops this from being called an outright fill-in issue is that there is a co-plot credit to Timothy Shooter, who was the regular writer on the series, and who was having a disastrous run on the book. It's clear what parts are him, and it's pretty apparent what DeMatteis brought the issue. We begin with a young child. The little boy, he wants to speak to the Avengers, and he is very rude. You know what? This is probably the best issue of Timothy Shooter's second run on Avengers, because it's A, not written by him, B, doesn't feature Aunt Gordon or Moon Garden, and C, Captain America is not written as a belligerent arsehole. And then we get to see a child shoot himself in the head. I want to give props to Marvel Comics and Timothy Shooter for actually going through with this. It's genuinely pretty taboo breaking stuff. And if I had one criticism, it's that we didn't see enough of this sort of stuff in comics. We need to see a lot more annoying children blow their brains out. But this is a Timothy Shooter parable, which are interesting ideas that didn't work great as comics, because he very rarely has actual resolutions to his stories like this. The lack of a traditional ending, it works once or twice, but when most of your stories end vague and ambiguous, it only magnifies that you're maybe not the person who should be writing a book like this on a regular basis. You see, the little boy, he cannot die. He is immortal. He is cursed with eternal life. And there are shades of Avengers issue 200 in this, which is definitely not something you want to be reminding people of. But also, it turns out that the little boy who cannot die, he is actually Morgan McNeil Hardy, the Richard man with the tiny little car. And other than the bumper of his tiny little car here, we didn't get a good look at his tiny little car. It turns out that Morgan McNeil Hardy boy, he has lived numerous lives over the years. And yes, this does feel like a total arse pull. It almost feels as if Timothy Shooter had a half-baked idea. Timothy Shooter had a concept that he couldn't be bothered to write himself, and all DeMatteis could really deal with it is to link it all to this ongoing minor character that he had crop up a few times now. A man slash child who cannot die but wants to die and forces the Avengers into a position where they have to assisted suicide. That is pure Jimothy Shooter stuff. And like I just said, Jimothy Shooter's ideas are fine concepts, but they don't make good stories. They are like short stories for Tales of the Unexpected or the Twilight Zone. Forcing them into Avengers comics barely works because they didn't have traditional endings, and the only compromise he makes to the narrative is to put the superheroes to an ethical dilemma that is amplified because of their standing as superheroes instead of them being random people. Down here is homeless Laurel and Hardy. I didn't think Oliver Hardy is any relation to this Morgan Hardy gent. And we have a good example of what I mean by Jimothy Shooter's short stories almost being retrofitted to work as Avengers comics. Morgan McFrancis Dollarite, he goes off by himself and he nicks a rocket from NASA and then pilots it into the sun, hoping to finally kill himself for good. The Avengers have no part in this. They are not even aware that it has happened. And here is where it tries to justify itself as a superhero book instead of a sci-fi anthology title. Morgan McDonald's pound saver menu. He becomes a big fire monster for a few pages. He becomes a super villain for the heroes to oppose. I'm honestly a bit surprised that they didn't have a cover with the 4 Avengers fighting this generic sun monster thing instead of the much better cover that it has. This fire monster stuff, I think this was a requirement of the day. They needed a hero fighting bad guy fight in every issue. It wasn't long after this that I think they started dismantling that notion and having more subtle stuff. I'll give credit to Jim DeMatteis. We have a good bit with 4 at the end here. And earlier on in the issue, there was a page or two where he explored the Avengers and their feelings with regards to this person wanting to suicide himself. That stuff was good, and it felt like Jim DeMatteis was bringing the right sort of stuff to Jimothy Shooter's quite flimsy idea. Personally, I think this issue could have been better if it was just the Avengers sat around debating about helping this person kill themselves. Maybe do like a 12 Angry Men thing with it. But Jimothy Shooter stories didn't have a proper resolution. They are usually always very open-ended and ambiguous. Again, supporting the idea that they are not really superhero stories and instead rejected ideas for EC Comics. You'll also notice, if you have read enough Jimothy Shooter comics, there are a lot of recurrent elements. For example, here we have Morgan McNeil Diamond convincing the Avengers that he has lost all his powers and his memories, and he doesn't remember who he is or what his deal is. But then the final panel, which isn't emphasised enough in my opinion, it shows him with an evil grin, suggesting that he is lying and hiding the truth from the heroes, which is the exact same ending with Molecular Man in Secret Wars II. Piers Morgan McNeil Hardy never appears again though, so maybe we should just take the lie as fact instead. Before I finish this off, I want to point out Jimothy Shooter. He wrote a Hulk story where David Banner got raped by two gay men at the YMCA. This comic has some qualities to it. Like with most Jimothy Shooter, non-YMCA and non-Ant Gordon stories, there's something there. It's just not in its final form yet. Jim DeMatteis does the best that he could with an open-ended idea with no narrative resolution, but even him tying it to his Richard Man character seems out of nowhere. Worst of all, we didn't get a flashback cameo or any mention of Turner D Century. So fuck this comic, it is getting a 7 thumbs up.